Hamatakiapi. Diane Wilson Amakiapia, Video Wakantwan, Oyate Hamatahaya, Sichangu Oyate Edomawapia. So hello, all my relatives. It's good to see you here tonight. My name's Diane Wilson. I'm a descendant of the Bidewakantwan Oyate in Minnesota, and I'm also enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And I have to just applaud these two writers, both Bronwyn and Lynette, for just a fabulous reading. It's so much more fun to share the stage, because then we get three very different readings all in one. Thank you for the good packaging. And I also wanted to say what a blessing it is to be here on the solstice, the summer solstice, such a magical time of year, but to be here amongst writers, to be in this room, to be in the presence of water, and to be on Anishinaabe homeland. I mean, this is the ultimate summer solstice in my mind. Mm-hmm. And the way we started out today with that craft talk with Leah and Amy was also part of the wonder, that the way you both opened this day talking about wonder and awe. And Leah, I'm still thinking, I'm in awe of the way your last line, talking about, if you were here, the line. So that was a great way to start the day. So I am a Dakota writer, and that means that I'm descended from oral storytellers. And that actually impacts the writing that I do, because I feel part of a lineage. I feel part of a tradition of storytellers who, it's very important for those storytellers to preserve our culture and history, to teach values, and also to entertain. And so these stories range from sacred and traditional to modern stories that focus more on modern tribes and homelands. And so in my own writing, I like to say that I'm a gardener and a writer, because the two go hand in hand. And so that means for me, shorthand, I take care of seeds and stories. And so in my writing, I also take care of and preserve Dakota culture and history. And I especially focus on the way that assimilation has impacted generations of Native families. And really at the heart of my work is a commitment to cultural recovery. Because I believe that one of the most important ways that we do that work is through reclaiming our stories. So much of what I've done in these previous books has been about reclaiming those stories. And so tonight, I am going to talk about The Seed Keeper, which is my novel. I did think about reading the picture book, but I wasn't sure you could all see the pictures from where you sit. So, but the funny thing is, I found with the picture book that adults also like to listen to picture books. It just resonates with all of us. We still have that child in us who loves stories and pictures. So maybe next time I'll, in fact, we should have a picture book. Yes, I think that would be a really fun event. So in writing The Seed Keeper, I didn't realize it, but I actually started it about over 20 years ago, back in 2000, when I was working on a memoir about my mother's family. And I grew up in Minneapolis. I knew that my mother and my aunts went to boarding school on the Pine Ridge and the Rosebud Reservation. But in my family, nobody knew what they were for, why they had been established. And so when I became an adult, I started working on a memoir about 5 generations in my mother's family, to show how assimilation works across generations. And so that was my first book. It's Spirit Car Journey to a Dakota Past. But while I was working on that book, this is where the gardener writer thing comes in. I heard about these very old, rare tribal seeds that were being grown out on this tiny little garden just south of the Twin Cities. And as a gardener, I just knew I had to go and be with those seeds. I needed to be part of growing these seeds out. But as a writer, I was also fascinated by the stories they were carrying, because there was, for example, they had Cherokee Trail of Tears corn, and that was corn that was descended from the seeds that were carried on that original removal. They also had Hopi black turtle beans. They had tobacco that was hundreds of years old, traditional tobacco. And so what I didn't know at that time when I first started volunteering was how close those seeds had come to extinction. For many of them, there was just a handful remaining. So if you can imagine the pressure on the gardeners to be the ones growing those seeds out and trying to bring them back to the communities. So, but there was also, I didn't know about the really long history either between human beings and seeds, and the role that Native women played in protecting them, so that we have even the small amount of these seeds remaining today. So I started volunteering there and then went to work for what was Dream of Wild Health. And the reason I'm telling you this is that all of this went into writing The Seed Keeper. It took me a really long time to learn what I needed to know in order to write the book. So I worked in food sovereignty in Native organizations for close to 20 years. And I was so blessed to work with farmers and elders and Native families and the seeds themselves. And to me, this is when my real education began, when I started learning an entirely different way of looking at and relating to the world. And Amy was talking about that this morning when she was talking about that network and that connectedness that she feels and certainly writes about so beautifully in her book, in her books. But in Dakota, we have a saying, Mitakuye Owasi, and that is a similar philosophy of we are all related. And so this is the teaching that I was learning while I was working at the farm. And it had to do with understanding that when you are a relative to everyone around you, then you have a responsibility. You receive a gift from the plants and from the animals, from the water, all these gifts we receive from the earth, but that comes with the responsibility to also take care of that gift. And so that is the teaching of reciprocity. And so every day we would pray before we worked in the gardens, and we were learning how to have how to garden and how to have a relationship with the earth that was reverent. And when you garden in that way, when you come to that work in prayer, then that's when your food truly becomes your medicine. And so these were the teachings that I was blessed to be part of for many years. And as part of that process, then that's when I have confessed on many occasions, I'm a very slow writer. I do a lot of gathering, we'll just say that. And so that was a very important part, though, of my education in being able to write this book and to look at it both from the lens of what assimilation has done to Native communities and Native families, but then also that incredible transformative power of what happens when we return to, say, our traditional foods, when we return to that kind of relationship with another relative, whether it's water, whether it's soil, whether it's plants or seeds. When you really make that deep connection with a more than human relative, then you will be, your life will be transformed by that process. So for me then, writing this book became my way to give back to all the people who shared their wisdom with me, and to make sure that these stories were going to be carried forward into the future and to our broader communities. And I also felt a very deep responsibility for stories that have been silenced. And one of the stories is at the heart of the Seed Keeper. So in 2002, I was part of the Dakota Commemorative March, which here in Minnesota it was actually a 150-mile walk from the Lower Sioux Reservation to Fort Snelling to honor the 1,700 Dakota women, children, and elders who were forced marched after the 1862 Dakota War and then forcibly removed from the state. And so the story that I was told on that walk was that because these women didn't know where they were being sent or how they would feed their families, they sowed their seeds into the hems of their skirts and they hid them in their pockets. So even when families were starving, they protected those seeds for the next season and for future generations. And if you can imagine the sacrifice that would take to protect those seeds at a time like that, that's what really touched my heart. And let me know that even today, that even our challenges are very different, GMO seeds, but our responsibility is just as great. And so that became the story at the heart of the Seed Keeper. And then and then I built the story out from there. So the story actually opens with a poem, and today in class, and I'm just so enjoying the class and the terrific writers who are I get to spend time with. But today we were talking about characters, and I shared a writing exercise that I came up with back in the when I was really struggling to connect. I'd been away from the book for almost a year and I was really struggling to connect with it again. So I made up this writing exercise of listening to characters and then just doing stream of conscious writing, first person. And I also applied that to the seeds. And so I'm going to read you the opening poem. And this is what emerged out of that writing exercise and helped me develop the seeds actually as a character in the book. And it's just called The Seeds Speak. We are hungry, but the sleep is upon us. We are thirsty, but the mother has instructed us not to wake too early. We are restless, chafing against this thin membrane, pushing back against the dark that bids us to lie still, suspended in a near death that is not dying. We hold time in this space. We hold a thread to infinity that reaches to the stars. The mother gave us patience, stronger than our hunger, stronger than our thirst. We dwell in the realm of dreams and spirit. When the sun draws near, we awake and embrace the warmth, fed by the soil and nourished by the rain. When the cold returns, we withdraw once more to rest and to dream. We remember when all of the world had its own song. To know the song was to speak to all beings in their own language. The land told stories of faraway places, of mountains and cliffs and verdant valleys. The mighty river sang its slow course along the ridges once carved by a glacier. Long ago, when the frost was still dug deep in the earth, the humans came. They sang us awake and offered gifts of prayer. They came as humble relatives with a pitiful need to see their children survive. An agreement was made. We surrendered our wildness to live in partnership with the humans. Because we cared for each other, the people and the seeds survived. For many generations, this agreement was kept. Our hunger was fed, our thirst was quenched, our restlessness was fulfilled each time we breached the earth's crust to reach toward the sun, toward the stars. Then came a long silence, a drought of memory, a time of darkness. They came no more, calling us with song and prayer. Still we waited, just as the mother had instructed. The earth kept spinning through her seasons, but the humans did not return. Now our time is almost gone. The pulse of life flickers, dims as the heartbeat slows. We cannot wait much longer. And so the seeds also closed the book with the prayer. And that was my way of setting up the seeds as this is their story. And they are everything that comes in between those two pieces is the seeds observing how the humans are upholding that agreement or not. And so this is a story of watching that evolution of our relationship with those seeds from the perspective of the seeds themselves. So amazing what you can do with the writing exercise. So I tell the story through 4 Dakota women narrators, and actually they came out of that same writing exercise. It started out to be one character. The main character was Rosalie Ironwing, and she's a woman who has come to the furthest point that assimilation can take a family, where she doesn't speak her language, she has no connection to her community, and she believes she has no family. And so this is and so at the same time, doing that writing exercise then with 3 other characters opened up their voices, and they became a really important part of the story as well. And so I'm going to, and so the 3 other characters are Gabby Makepeace, who is Rosalie's best friend and is she overcomes a very traumatic childhood to become an activist and a lawyer working on behalf of the river. And this is a way of reminding ourselves that water is sacred. So Mini Wachoni, you may have heard that during the Standing Rock era, water's life. And we also hear from Darlene Kilsdeer, and she is Rosalie's great aunt. And so she spends much of her life looking for Rosalie while Rosalie is in foster care. And so when the story opens, Rosalie is just leaving home, where she's lived on a farm for 22 years, and she's returning to her childhood home on a Dakota reservation. And so she grew up, her father raised her till she was 12, and then when he dies unexpectedly, she goes into foster care, believing that she has no family. And so she marries a white farmer to escape her foster family. And that's when she learns to garden. And begins that journey that brings her back to her family's legacy of seeds, her family, and her connection to community. And so, for me, what this story is trying to say is that when we return to these relationships, it's a way of also coming home again to our place in community. So I want to read another excerpt that is, this is set in 2002. The story goes between 1862 and 2002. And this is Rosalie just meeting her great aunt, Darlene Kilsdeer, for the first time. And I tell you this in the preface. I tell you, even though she believes she has no family, she does have this aunt. And it was a way of not making this the tension in the story. So this is her first visit with her son, Thomas, to visit her great aunt. Darlene's voice faded until it was little more than a whisper. The loud tick of the clock on the kitchen wall was the only sound in the room. My eyes were closed, and when I opened them, I saw Thomas holding his head in his hands. Darlene's face was drawn and tired, her thin shoulders slumped forward. The nurse appeared and said, "Miss Darlene, you've worn yourself right out." Taking my great aunt's elbow, she helped Darlene stand up on shaky legs and make her slow way from the dining room table back to the recliner in the living room. Thomas and I followed. The nurse placed the oxygen tube beneath Darlene's nose, hooked the plastic behind her ears, and held out a white pill. Darlene took several deep breaths. Then she sat up, pushed the pill away, and pulled the tube from her face. "I'm not done yet," Darlene said. "There's one more story she needs to know. You really need to take this. I don't have time." With a sigh, she looked first at Thomas and then at me. "We're a mess," she said, "a broken down mess, and we're all that's left. Don't go wasting time feeling sorry for yourself. Plenty of people have had a rough life. You just make the best of it. That's all anyone can do. The two of you still have time to do better. It's up to you." Pointing to the scrawny corn growing in buckets of hand-packed soil, she said, "That's the best I could do. Hauled those buckets myself with no help from anybody. All the old people downstairs said, 'You can't do it.' I said, 'You have no idea.' Rosalie, I didn't expect to see you again. I didn't think anyone but me would ever care about these seeds. I thought they'd die with me. But there you sit, my great niece, my last relative. You have the truth and more to take home with you. Nurse, I need my basket, please." We waited in silence for the nurse to return and lay a large hand-woven basket on Darlene's lap. She smiled as her arthritic fingers ran slowly across the rough willow exterior. Reaching inside, she carefully pulled out a piece of deer antler and several small sacks, each one tied closed with a red string. Opening one bag, she shook a few corn kernels into her palm and handed them to me, tiny jewels of lavender blue, rose, and cream. "That's Dakota corn, Wamanaheza, a gift from my great-grandmother, Machpia Maza, to Marie, and then to my mother, Suzanne. I don't think it's been grown since the summer my sister Lorraine was taken away to boarding school. Every fall, we dried most of the corn in braids that hung in a dark corner of the cabin, not too near the fire. We kept baskets filled with beans, another with strips of dried squash. The willow basket was supposed to go to Lorraine, and she knew I was lying when I said it was lost. She hated me for keeping those seeds from her. They were her birthright, the only thing left from her old life. But when she came back, everything she touched withered and died. My brothers, her daughter. I couldn't let her have the seeds. Deep down, I think she knew it too. To this day, I don't know if I did right. Maybe they would have helped her find her way back. I couldn't risk it. The old ones told Suzanne that a time was coming when the seeds would go into hiding. They said that people would no longer respect them or the land or the water, that the seeds would leave, some returning to the soil, others simply waiting in darkness. They told her to be ready. Just before she died, my mother gave me the basket. She knew that Lorraine was not coming back, not the girl we had known and loved. The spirit of the schools was too strong, she said, too hungry, and it would not ever let them go. Rosalie, I'm giving you this basket. Find a safe place to grow the seeds. I don't know what else to tell you. Love them like your children, the way you love your son. Darlene turned to Thomas. Come closer, Takoja. Let me look at you. You have your grandfather's face. I'm going to give you this. From the basket, she withdrew a small object and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a perfectly preserved cob of corn that had faded to a dull, lifeless red. She placed the cob in Thomas's hand and closed his fingers gently around it. This corn has been in our family for many, many generations. It came with the antler so that we would always remember. Take it, Takoja. Maybe it will help you remember. And so we move around in the story. We move in time, we move between voices, the four narrators. So in addition to Rosalie and Gabby and Darlene Kilsdeer, there is also Marie Blackbird, and she is Rosalie's great-great-grandmother. And she was 14 at the time of the 1862 Dakota War. And she's the one that carries that story that I told you about the Dakota women sowing the seeds in their skirts. And so she also carries some of the real sorrow of this history, the war, the removal afterwards, and then the beginning of the boarding school era, which also impacted her family. And so the question that I'm trying to ask in this book is about our relationship with seeds. And by extension, you know, for me, seeds are a metaphor for our relationship with the world around us. And when I think about what's happening today with, you know, that's so often called the climate crisis, what I think about is whether this is really a crisis of relationship, that we have forgotten how to be in relationship with seeds and plants and water and soil and everyone around us. So the seeds for me are the metaphor for the way we are relating to the world. So that's the question that I'm trying to ask in this book, is how has that relationship changed over time, and what that change means for us as human beings and for the seeds themselves. And I always like to think about a question raised by a Dakota activist and scholar, Harley Eagle, who said, how do we fall back in love with the earth and with our seeds? And so I'm going to close with another short excerpt. And this is actually set in 1998. And this is when Rosalie is living on the farm and she's just learning to garden. And her son is a teenager, and she's just beginning that relationship with seeds. A few months before the first shipment of GMO seeds was due to be delivered, I knocked on the door of Tommy's room. He was a young man now and kept it closed all the time. His deep voice cracked as he called out for me to enter. Inside, clothes were strewn in untidy heaps. A math book was open on his desk, and he sat playing his favorite video game. He looked at me with curiosity. So seldom did I come to his room except to put away laundry. What's up? Tommy, your father listens to you. If you tell him not to use these seeds, he'll pay attention. Why would I do that? I told him my fears. Then I added an argument that I hoped would spark a memory of what he had learned as a boy. It's not right what they've done to these plants. It's not right to take life apart like that, just because it will make money. You remember when you were younger, and we talked about how the corn feeds the little voles who become food for the hawks, how the sandhill cranes eat the leftover seeds when they stop here to rest during their fall migration. Even the crows rely on field corn to survive. What happens to the birds when they eat these seeds? What happens to us? Nothing, Mom. Nothing is going to happen to the birds or to you and me and Dad, except that for once, we'll make some good money. Even you can't argue with that. After that conversation with my son, I barely listened when Tommy and John talked about the farm. I didn't want to give up, not when the Minnesota River was already one of the most polluted in the country. But I wondered if there was a different way for me to do this work. Excuse me. I had tried to be like Gabby, who used her skills as a lawyer to fight threats to the river and the land. Maybe it wasn't my way to fight from anger. Maybe I needed to learn how to protect what I loved instead. For now, at least, that left me with my garden. I poured my time and energy into caring for her, feeding the soil with manure I spread with a shovel, watering the plants by hand. Some days I sang to them, serving up a mix of my father's old powwow songs. Once John offered to spray his pesticide to kill the weeds, thinking to save me time. I glared at him until he threw up his hands and said, "Okay, okay, do it your way." And I did, sweating for long hours under the hot July sun, as if my pain was nothing compared to what had been done to the earth and water around me. A library book showed me that the tiny seeds I had taken for granted were actually unique living beings with their own history, story, and family. Each seed was made of an embryo, a seed coat, and something nutritious, almost like a packed lunch. The mother plant, like me, wanted only the best for her babies. Somehow the mother knew to dry her seeds almost completely so they would sleep until the time was right to wake. Each seed held a trace of life that would spark when given water, when given the appropriate conditions. Everywhere I looked, I saw how seeds were holding the world together. They planted forests, covered meadows with wildflowers, sprouted in the cracks of sidewalks, or lay dormant until the long-awaited moment came, signaled by fire or rain or warmth. They filled the produce aisle in grocery stores. Seeds breathed and spoke in a language all their own. Each one was a miniature time capsule, capturing years of stories in its tender flesh. How ignorant I felt compared to the brilliance contained in a single seed. I had begun to see that when we save these seeds, when we select which ones will be planted again, our lives become braided into the life stories of these plants. Thank you.